Welcome to the Week in Italian Startup, where we discuss the latest highlights happening in the Italian tech and investment ecosystem. Getting started, last week, Muffin, a fintech startup, raising 3.2 million from a syndicate of business angels. So let's start from this week's. This quarter has not been particularly, amazing for Italy. Let's just say that. If you guys want to check that, or for all the listeners, and Niccolo has like a great dashboard. So link in the newsletter, and then you can really interact with the latest numbers, and that's very interesting. And what we're noticing is that this quarter has not been amazing. It's pretty much flat, essentially, with a few exceptions. So it's always good to mention maybe a few examples. So Muffin is probably one of them, with a very particular story. So Muffin basically was incubated by a Turin-based venture studio called Fit, and then basically it took the life on its own, and then it evolved up to actually raising 3.2 million. So Muffin in general is working on bringing technology and AI to identify the bando di innovazione, so anything related basically to all sort of how would you call them in English, like public some public I would say not competition, even is essentially like funding that is available for new tech, and people and companies can actually access to that. So incentives of general sorts. And the problem in Italy is that this is very frequent in general, but is extremely tough to actually track them, pin them down, understanding when they open, how they work, etc. So there is a lot of mess there. There is very messy. So Muffin is really trying to bring order with that, with some very interesting addition of services. So, that's a very interesting place. So let's start maybe from the general value proposition. What's your take on this, Nick?
Well, I've been working with startups for like 10 years. We know that there are a lot of government-related funding sources, both national and local government, local at the regional level or at the city level, even for major cities. And all of these are opportunities to get to funding programs. And there are a few focused at startups, and there are many focused at very different type of entrepreneurial offerings. So different verticals for, female entrepreneurship, for developing local entrepreneurship. And as you said, knowing when they open, when they close, what you need to apply, the way they work is a mess. Some of them even have a first come, first served type of approach. So you need to move swiftly in order to apply. So it's complicated. So I understand where they're coming from in order to propose a service solution to all the entrepreneurs looking for this type of access to finance. So it makes sense. It's probably something that you do a lot manually, maybe paying for someone, your, accountant, tax accountant, or someone from your team to keeping their eyes open. But then you need to prepare the paperwork. So I think the value proposition rings a bell. So to the average entrepreneur, local entrepreneur or big entrepreneur in Italy. So it looks as if making sense, of course. So.
Yeah, one interesting point is that there is already value in bringing order to chaos, so which is great. But on top of that, I think they're really experimenting to provide also the extra mile, which is services on top of that, which I think is really smart. So one first thing they're doing is basically they claim to provide advance payments for the people winning this kind of state competition to access certain funding. So anticipi, very interesting angle. So this is more of a financial kind of product. So going toward sort of, it has a banking flavor over there, I think. And yeah.
Well, maybe on this they're onto something because I think it is probably the most interesting. You're right to as pointing it out. Um, there are many projects that work by um, paying back expenses. So you need to have working capital in order to sustain expenses that will be paid back by the public funding programs. So there might be something there.
Yeah, I think there is something good. And of course, on top of that, they basically rely on a network of about 200 plus advisors that are specialists in different kind of these kind of like programs essentially. So that's also pretty valuable. So that's a very interesting way to monetize. So definitely very interesting angle for them. All right, moving on to the next deal. So very interesting, like great Italian founders raising a lot of money in AI. So let's talk about this. Axelera AI, Netherlands-based AI chip design company led by Fabrizio Del Maffeo, raising 68 million. And the CDP Venture Capital also participated into the round. So very interesting deal for a couple of points. So first of all, the total amount raised is about 120 million to date, including the 68. So very interesting company with a very good, successful funding history. And on top of that, the vertical they're playing, which is the Edge AI chips. So as we were mentioning in other episodes, Edge AI refers to generally like a local application of AI, being it in hardware or software. So essentially, instead of using cloud-based services, is actually bringing the AI on the device, on like very close to the data point for different reasons that we can explore. But what is interesting is that there are like we are starting seeing a lot of Italians working in that space. What's your first impression on this, Nick?
Well, I have to say, I've been following Axelera since the inception. Uh, so the hardware part is not in our scope, but I liked what they were doing since they started. It was during the pandemic, I think, the moment I found out about them, when there is this the seed round. Axelera as an interesting story because it's basically a spin-off from another startup operating, I think, in the crypto space, so something along those
Correct. Yes, in the
lines,
blockchain crypto space. Yeah.
the blockchain space. So they spun out the company. The original the mother was the first investor in the new venture, and then they started raising institutional capital in order to continue growth. And I like the fact that it's one of the few hardware-related startups in the AI space raising funding in the EU. I wish we had more of them, but at least we have a few. And according to VentureBeat, it seems this is the largest Series B round in the fabless semiconductor space. So
Wow.
pretty amazing.
Not bad.
Hmm.
So yeah, a few level of interest also because Edge AI is kind of coming out with so there are a few things which I think is worth mentioning. So maybe that's the way that smaller and niche focused AI companies can actually compete with giants like Nvidia in developing something with very specific applications. So definitely it's a vertical to monitor very closely. I mean, clearly Nvidia cannot can probably not touch all the potential, all the possible application in a way that a dedicated startup can. So that's the only way to kind of compete with the giant. What is your take on this one? I have to
Yeah,
say.
well, I, I tend to agree with you, meaning it is unlikely that NVIDIA will cover the entire AI space. And there are probably some um, reasons not to go after the marginal customer, for example, on the edge, because once you're focusing on the powerhouses and you're innovating on the trend line of the powerhouses, so the strongest, the most powerful GPUs, data center related GPUs. Maybe you will not go after very different, at least apparently. I'm not an hardware engineer. Um, Technological paradigm. So it's similar, but it's not the same. So you have to optimize for different variables: space, heat, power. Um, so I don't know whether NVIDIA will ever wish to go after that part of the market. And at the
Yeah,
same
probably.
time, no,
Yeah.
please.
So no, what I was thinking is that probably there are like pros to the edge AI angle, which current AI is not really like providing. So maybe for application where they don't want to depend on cloud computing, where privacy is like of primary importance, and maybe a few advantages actually, because edge AI can use like lower bandwidth, for example. So maybe there are like specific application for that, so that operational efficiency can actually be big. So there are a few advantages that certain very specific application that are sensitive to these elements, then they might be willing to actually try this sort of local edge AI application rather than what is usually available. So
No.
I can see that happening in some use cases, but I agree with you. It's not immediate, and it's really worth seeing the technical part, which is the toughest part to actually evaluate, probably.
Well, I think we had, so probably in a different market, but it's the similar reasoning. We saw it with Apple Intelligence, because what Apple did basically when launching this new um, paradigm, I don't know, is saying basically we built smaller LLMs basically, and they're putting this LLM into the device and demanding, leaving the simpler tasks on the device and offloading the complex tasks to the cloud only when you need to do it. Uh, and that probably resonates with what's gonna happen in the broader AGI space. That maybe it will be much more B2B industrial than just consumer. But it makes sense. You can already deploy smaller AI agents locally and delegate to the cloud, to the big data centers, only the hardest task. And you save space, as you said, bandwidth, connectivity, power, just by leaving
Yeah,
reactivity
and
also. Time to react to some kind of information. So there might
And
be
that's
something.
perfectly enough. That's definitely perfectly enough for certain application. Like let's say regular, like phone user application. Maybe there are 500, 800 tasks that they do. Well, even less maybe. Book a calendar, make a calendar invite, send an email, summarize an article. I don't think the list is that long. So once the LLM is optimized for those, basically it's an 80-20 Pareto sort of deal where,
Yeah.
80% of the tasks are probably going to be done by a local LLM, as you say,
Yeah.
which saves a lot and it's quicker and more efficient.
Now, without staying on the LLMs only, I think they're focusing on visual, so video. Think about autonomous driving, whereas just the need for quick reaction means that if you can offload some reasoning on the edge of the
Good
car,
point.
just with this, you can gain that split second to react to some external information coming in, or I think satellites. I think cameras, for example, security, surveillance, uh, and those are the obvious applications. But I guess there are three or more that might come to mind, or might be enabled by the capability to put something that can react
Yeah.
to visual information somewhere locally instead of offloading the computation. So we'll see what happens in the
We'll
future.
see. We'll see. Very interesting. Definitely like an interesting. Right. So when fundraising doesn't look too interesting in these months, at least we have some activity when it comes to acquisition or inter-acquisition between startups and bigger startup of corporation. So let's mention a few that you mentioned in the newsletter that are definitely interesting. So Yolo Group acquiring Kalibo, Correduria de Seguros, Unguess acquiring Ferpection, TeamSystem acquiring Change Capital, and General Finance acquiring Work Invoice. So when you see these kind of like movements, what is your first thinking? I mean, is it a good sign? Is it a bad sign? Is it neutral? Of course, it's a case by case probably like scenario here, but
Yeah, of
but it's
course.
not that often to see this. We see acquisition, but it's not as often, as we might think. Yeah.
No, not as often as we might want, in particular when the acquirer is an Italian entity, in particular when the acquirer is an Italian startup going abroad. So I think the first two, Yolo Group, and disclaimer, Yolo is from our portfolio, and the second is Unguess, pushing on the international presence. The first one, Yolo, acquiring a Spanish company, and Unguess acquiring a French company. And that's nice. So to me, it is good news. I see companies that are expanding abroad, try to have an international footprint, and that's, I think, good news. Hopefully, it's a creative acquisitions. Excellent. Sometimes I wonder what's the backstory, what's going on there, and you go and you try to know more, understand more. For example, I found it interesting about the story about Work Invoice. So General Finance is a listed company operating in general in the financial sector, so in invoicing and factoring stuff like that. And Work Invoice was, I can say, I think, a startup that raised, according to Crunchbase, some funding, 4.2 million in total, with the latest round raised from CRIF. CRIF is a multinational based out of Italy, operating in the credit space in general. They do a lot of stuff, but credit is the core, credit and risk analysis. And they also invested and are supporting in the startup ecosystem. And General Finance acquired Workinvoice, and the price is public. So according to the article, they are paying 6.2 million euros. It is a first installment. I don't know whether there is an earnout. 1.8 million in cash and the rest in shares. So it is interesting. I mean, it says something about the multiples that are going around, the value. That's what's happening here. So it gives some
Yeah, definitely not
signal.
something you see every day. This dynamic is not common, so that's definitely worth keeping, like, seeing and deepening what's going on. But yeah, very interesting,
Um,
interesting
in,
way
in,
to
in, in the small
structure
M&A
that.
space, yeah, in the small M&A space, numbers are usually quite hidden because
Yeah,
you really
it's
only
a different game.
different game, different game. So it's
Different game.
interesting to see the actual numbers in plain sight, and you can reason about what's going on.
Awesome. Nick, thank you so much. This concludes this week's episode of the Week in Italian Startup. So we will be back end of July after a little break. So for the listener, also Nick newsletter will be back at the end of July. And thank you everyone for joining, and thank you Nick for joining today.
Thank you, Jack. Take care. Ciao, everybody. See you in a couple of weeks.